Awesome. So welcome to the Grow with Ryan Magic show. I'm here with Stefanos Sifandos, who is a good friend of mine. We go way back. We've recently connected in again, and it has been super special. And I really appreciate you being here today, man.
Yeah, likewise, brother. Super excited.
So we did an interview a few weeks ago, which was really awesome. And Zoom got the first 45 minutes. And we started to get quite juicy around that mark for probably it was quite a long interview. And it actually got cut off in the actual recording afterwards. We've got a double backup now today. And I'm really pumped to ask you some more questions. So the wisdom that we went through in the last session will just be between you and me.
I love it.
So, man, the thing that I admire most about you is I admire a lot of things, but the thing I admire most is your devotion to being a beautiful contributor in your relationship. It's just plain and simply what I admire most. I think it shows so much about your character, and I really want to dive deep into some questions in that area. And I want to start with some kind of quick practical questions, because I know that in relationships behind closed doors, stir up a lot of turbulence in pretty much every relationship. And I don't think we're ever really taught how to navigate that properly. You know, how do you respond in certain situations when you feel triggered? There's just so many different elements. So I'm going to rapid fire you some questions, and I know that's going to lead to a really cool discussion. So my first question, man, is that when you when you have something that you want to give in the way of feedback, or there's something that is, you know, on your mind and it's causing you frustration internally, how do you guys go about approaching communication that could be around delicate topics or something that could potentially offend the other person?
Yeah. The first step is for us, we make sure that the other person has space to be able to hear it and receive it. And so that's as simple as saying, hey, I want to talk to you about something. Do you have space now? And if you don't have space now, when will you have space? And let's coordinate. You know, it may take, you can be really detailed and super structured, or super in a masculine energetic, and say, it's going to take 20 to 25 minutes, or this is how long it's going to take. This is when my preference is to.
Here's an agenda.
Yeah, basically, you can get really super structured, or you can be a little bit more fluid with it. But just asking that person, hey, really would just love to connect on something that's really important to me. That's a good way to frame it as well, because, you know, if you come in saying, hey, look, I want to talk to you about something that's really sensitive, and you sort of know they don't have time for another 3 hours, that could be stewing on that. So just say, hey, I want to talk about something that's really important. When do you have some space? And then I say, of course, now, or how long do you need? And you may say, I need an hour. Cool. 6 p.m. tonight. Done. That works for me as well. Let's chat then. Let's connect then.
I feel like you guys are pretty next level in terms of your experience in relationships, and your level of groundedness and self-worth is really, really quite powerful.
It's in my part, then self-worth part, because, you know, we don't have
most
that
of the game.
We project. yeah.
Totally. But what happens if I was to bring that up and mention that with Danny, or she was to bring it up with me, just based on where I'm at the moment, I would be thinking, well, what is it? Like, what do you want to talk? Like the stewing thing.
Yeah.
Do you ever drop any pre-frame? Is it not relevant for you to kind of pre-frame, you know, everything's all sweet, it's just something that I want to bring up to help further create connection in our relationship? Or
Well, Christine has had in the past tendency to worry a little bit. You know, it's just one of her patterns. It's nothing massively intense. Well, it can be intense, but nothing massively intense. She's really done a lot of deeper work around that and shifted through that. So I'm mindful of that, and I'm cognizant about. I mean, you've got to be cognizant of your partner's wounds or your partner's pain point. She's very cognizant of mine. She's very cognizant of how she communicates to me, the words that she uses, the body language, all of that. She's very deliberate and intentional with how she looks at me, where she places her hands, you know, and I'm the same with her as well.
Wow.
Do we have to pre-frame and preface? And that becomes natural, by the way. It seems like it's a lot of work, but it's really not. It's just being kind and compassionate with each other. You know, that's considerate. It's just being considerate of the other person's, you know, step in their shoes for a moment, you know, and I wouldn't say to her, hey, I've got something to talk to you about. Can we talk about it later? If I know she's in a really stressed out position right now, I'd wait till she's more receptive, or I'll just wait until I know she's available to talk about
Mm,
something. But even then, I may not know, because she may have the time, but she may not have the internal space or the internal emotional bandwidth to want to deal with something deep. And so if she might ask, she might say, look, is it something super serious? I have to be really attentive. And I will just be honest and say yes, no, maybe, whatever that looks like. So after we've gone through that process, and you don't need to preface anything, but you can if it makes you feel better.
mm,
You just go through a process of sitting across from your partner, making sure that physiologically you're facing each other, especially for the man facing, in a heteronormative dynamic, the man is facing the woman, because biologically and from an evolutionary perspective, when we would hunt as men, when we would be out in the wild as men, we would usually be side to side or back to back with our males. And it's a very male thing to be side to side. When we're with females, we're generally more face to face. And so there's a lot that's said about us coming together and being face to face. There's a presence that comes with that. And again, that presence leads to availability, leads to reliability, leads to trustworthiness. And then that ultimately leads to safety. So again, your body language and how you posture yourself, if your partner's love language is physical touch their hand when you're talking to them about serious things or things that are really important to you and to your heart and to the relationship. Let them know that you're there and you care. Make it about, other things that we're both very mindful of, is not making it about them, but making it about us. So if she's done something that's upset me, I don't want to say to her, you said this and it upset me. Because I'm sort of diffusing responsibility there. And I'm just saying, basically, you change the way you express and communicate so I don't feel bad. That's
mm,
codependency, and that's me giving my power away. A more effective way to say it, and a more place of ownership and responsibility, is when I heard you say this, or when you said this in this way, what it reminded me of was ... or how it made me feel was ... And whilst that's not your responsibility, I'm just checking in with myself, and I'm wondering, can we communicate to that differently, because it's sensitive for me, or it's a bit of a pain point for me. Now, that level of vulnerability can be difficult because, again, men, from an evolutionary perspective, aren't really conditioned to be vulnerable. And culturally, we're not conditioned to be vulnerable. That compounded layered on top of the biological aspect. So
mm,
just being mindful of this stuff, being mindful of how you would want to be spoken to. That
mm,
it's not that hard. It's treat your neighbor as you want to be treated. It's sort of
mm.
simple stuff, and just giving it some attention and thought, as opposed to coming in as a wounded child and saying you. But what about if we look at ourselves? That old adage, you're pointing one finger, three are pointing back at you. Well, what about that? And we just, okay, well, how can we be responsible for this and bring that level of responsibility to the conversation? So we're both
Yeah.
really cognizant of that. And it doesn't always happen. And sometimes it's a bit of a shit show, but most of the time it's not. And it's because we care enough about ourselves and the relationship. And we know that the relationship is a vehicle for our own internal growth as well. So call it selfish to some degree, or selfish selflessness. What I call it is, there is a selfish component there of, if I show up in a really healthy way here, I get healthy feedback, which gives me insight and creates openness in my being, mind, heart, body, and gives me insight into how I can evolve as a man, as a human being. And I
Yes.
value that, and so does she.
Yeah. There's so many beautiful pieces of wisdom there. Really appreciate you sharing that. It's
Yeah.
really on point as well. One thing I found for me is that if I'm fantastic as a man at sharing vulnerabilities intellectually. So I'll say what's going on for me.
Mm.
Where I have struggled is sharing it emotionally. So for example, I might say, look, what you said earlier, that really hurt my feelings. And, it made me feel, unworthy and X, Y, Z, just as opposed to like looking at her in the eye and having that presence there, and then just allowing the emotion to come through.
Mm.
And what I found, and I guess this probably would differ with different people, but with my relationship with Danny, who is very emotional herself, like she's really an empath, she's very feeling based. I could say everything exactly how it's going on, and a lot of it, she can't receive it if I'm not expressing the emotion that comes with it.
Mm.
Do you think, what's your opinion on that?
I have a couple of thoughts on that. For men in particular, this is we're learning how to walk. And when we're speaking about vulnerability and emotions, we're learning how to walk, and we can learn to walk a proper way, or we can learn to walk a very inefficient way, which is going to cause spinal issues and hip issues and joint issues later on down the track, right? So we can learn to emote and express in a healthy way that suits who we are as men and who we are in healthy masculine postures, or we can become something that we're not. We all strive for familiarity. Men want women to understand them because most men, for various reasons, biological and cultural to simplify it, don't emote really well and are more analytical and logical in their thinking. They're more linear in their thinking. That doesn't mean they're better at it. It just means that that's more of a go-to strategy for a male brain and a masculine individual. And again, there are evolutionary reasons to that, okay? And we want women to understand us. Like women want us to express feelings. Why? Yes, females, again, hormonally, biologically, evolutionarily, there are reasons why women are able to tap into their emotions at a different level. We both have limbic systems that govern, emotionally regulate us. But we're not, as men, we're not conditioned culturally as well as socially. It's not really accepted. Boys don't cry. Be a man, don't be a little baby. Stop being a sissy. All these things. These slogans and ideologies are perpetuated through our culture. But let me go back to this. So, men want women to be this way, women want men to be this way, so to speak, because there's a familiarity there, right? And we thrive in familiarity and we feel safe in familiarity. But here's the reality. We don't want women to be like us. Yes, we want to be understood. We want to be seen. We want to be heard. We want to be respected, appreciated, and acknowledged. That's a basic human function. And women don't want us to emote wildly and in a leaky way or in a watery way. Not that women emote in a watery way, not at all. What we need is a healthy balance of, because before I go there, we complement each other. Difference drives polarity, drives attraction. Similarity creates safety. In a world that is uncertain and unsafe, we're going to want more safety. So we're going to want to be more like each other by default. But what we forget is that we need to celebrate difference because we complement each other. Mm. Our masculinity complements the femininity. The femininity complements our masculinity. Our strengths and weaknesses as a species meet in union. There's something really beautiful about that. We need to celebrate our differences. We don't want to be like each other. Mm. Even if you're in a same-sex marriage or same-sex couple, or there's four of you and you're in a same-sex union, you want masculine, feminine. I'm just getting as whatever, however different you want to be. It doesn't matter because masculine, feminine energetics reside within all of us.
Yes.
We'll hit a sort of ceiling there with the hormonal aspect and the biological aspect. However, energetically and not so much emotionally, but energetically, we can express in a more balanced way where roles are being played by masculine and feminine dynamic. Mm. And so when we come back to that, we come back to this, we want this healthy balance and we want to complement each other. As men, we want to be able to tap into our emotions, process it in a self-reliant way, first on our own. This is my opinion. Then take it to a brotherhood, take it to a group of men, where we can be reflected through a familiar essence and a familiar being. And then we can bring it to our partners. Now, that doesn't mean you're intellectualizing your emotions and you're only telling it through words or verbiage what you're feeling. You can show emotion, but it's coming from a more grounded, centered, controlled place. Now, careful with that word controlled. Yeah. I should say mastered place. Yes. So you're not being fake with your emotions, but you've got mastery of self, and you can emote, but you're not emoting in a leaky way, because you keep doing that over time, you won't be attractive to your partner. I went through a phase with Christine where I was emoting in a very leaky way because I was doing some very deep inner childhood work in late 2018, and it was bringing up a lot of stuff, and it broke me, man. It fucking broke me. And I was very leaky with my emotions. I was projecting. She didn't want that. That was diffusing the polarity. So when you damaging our relationship.
So when you say leaky, do you mean that it comes out in like an involuntary way?
It wasn't even that's part of it, but I had no control over it. I had no mastery over it, and I was projecting it. So I was feeling my emotions and blaming her for the way I was feeling. So it wasn't just tears and sadness.
Sure.
It was anger, it was frustration, it was jealousy, it was envy, it was all these emotions. I was going through the gamut. And I was blaming her because I was leaky with it. I wasn't processing it on myself because that was the phase of the work that I was doing. It was psychosomatic, sexual somatic work. It was very deep work. That wasn't healthy for our dynamic or our polarity, sustained. Now, I was being emotional, but it wasn't the right type of emotion. And I'll accept full responsibility for that. And I don't like owning that or admitting that because I was out of my masculine. I was in shadow feminine, and I was out of a healthy masculine. And I was in what I would call an inwardly projected masculine. And it was not attractive in any capacity. And I was so far removed from the core essence of who I was. I felt so apathetic, so submissive. So I was carrying resignation, everything I do, apathy, I gave up. And that's the type of leaky emotion I'm speaking to. And similarly, men don't want a woman men like to compete, and we compete to cultivate self-worth, and we compete to cultivate self-identity. Man doesn't want to compete with the woman in his life, the primary woman in his life. And so if she's thinking like him and being like him at a biological hormonal level, at a neurological level, he will perceive that as a threat or competition because you're not being complimented. Strengths are being challenged. Then what is he going to do naturally? He's going to challenge back. Imagine that dynamic. I've been in that dynamic as well.
Yeah.
Ugly. Where a masculine man, not in a healthy masculine, has been with a female that's in her masculine. And that, at the beginning, sure, with the hormonal, the honeymoon period, it's fine. But after a while, it doesn't work, as an example.
Yeah, that's brilliant stuff. So what would you have done differently? No, like practically, if you could go back with your current awareness, no regrets from the past, and being in that space where there was leaky emotion coming out, if you had your time, would you go and express how you felt with the men in your life and known that was a safe space, and then brought that more centeredness to the relationship? Or how would you do it differently?
Yes, that big part of it. So circumstantially, and again, these are reasons, not less excuses, but also excuses because I had access to it. I had just moved country. I was feeling displaced. I was missing my family and friends. I wasn't feeling grounded. Certain parts of my business started taking off, which was great, but that also came with some imposter syndrome. And I mean, really taking off, and all these things were happening. I was processing very old things. Wounded child stuff was coming up. Wounded parental dynamic stuff was coming up. What I would do differently was process those emotions on my own and have the courage to do that. And I did eventually, but I just had to go through the gamut of shit first and reach out to the people in my life that would be able to support me and see me and love me and care for me, and also the coaches and the people that I had in my life to support, because one of my patterns was not reaching out to people. But I ended up breaking that. But at the beginning, I didn't. And that's what I would do differently. I would trust in myself and go into that place. And look, the reality is it had to happen that way because I've learned so much. I've grown so much. I have so much more confidence in myself as an individual, as a man. I project far less. I hold our relationship as sacred, and at the same time, less attached than I've ever been. More deeply committed than I've ever been, and more attached than I've ever been, and less attached. More non-attached than I've ever been, to the point where if Christine walked through the door now and she said, look, I want to leave you and I'm really serious about this, I wouldn't be in massive fear. Of course I'd be sad. Of course I'd want to know why, I talk about it and go through it, but I wouldn't be distraught and distressed because of the level of groundedness I have in who I am. I never had that before. And because of that, I took control of all my previous relationships. And I would be the one leaving them, and I would be the one making reasons for them to not want to be there. And it was very distorted because I wasn't dealing with my stuff.
It sounds like you put a lot of you hold yourself to very high standards when I'm listening to what you've just said about that journey, you know, I think the best lessons come with blood, because they're the ones that you remember. And that, to me, I do the mistakes you're talking about at the moment all the time, and I feel like I'm going to keep making mistakes for the rest of my life. So, you know, I feel like it's super important to have massive grace around these things. But
Yeah, brother, I agree. I think they're mistakes, like in a movie. Mistake, let's take it again. And that's okay, right? The issue is, I think it becomes a mistake that's not bountiful and fruitful when we choose not to learn from that choice or experience.
Yes.
That's a shame. That becomes a shame. And often we actually shame ourselves, and we fall into and move into deep shame.
Yeah, that was super helpful for me. And I'm sure it was for the other men that are listening, to understand that when you've got these feelings coming up, realizing that you can take them, process them on your own, let them out, whether that's through exercise, breath work, meditation, smashing a pillow,
Yep.
whatever it is, screaming into a pillow, screaming out loud, and then bring groundedness to the relationship so you can be that masculine rock. What about the woman? If the woman's got a lot of like stuff going on the same, how can she emulate that same like process, but one that's more suitable for the feminine energy?
Yeah. So the feminine energy really works well in intimate groups and intimate sisterhood. And again, there's evolutionary and cultural reasons for that. And so definitely, and depending on you as an individual, are you a verbal processor? Are you a somatic processor? Are you both? Or do you just need to talk stuff out?
Is somatic processor just like it coming out
in
of
the body? Yeah, you know,
like tears and
if you're sad, letting the tears come, convulsion in the body. If you're angry, moving the body, hitting pillows, hitting bags, screaming, primal movement, you know.
Yeah.
So knowing what type of processor you are is helpful, and being able to process in different ways is important too. But bringing that to an intimate group, to a girlfriend, a friend, a sister, you know, to someone or a couple or three or four, that's really, really important. Men generally, from an evolutionary perspective, we've really evolved to work well in small groups, but more in larger groups. So we're quite comfortable in that space. Whereas women, a little bit different. And so going to a sister and really processing that, but also really sharing vulnerably. Every man wants to be a hero in the life of the woman that is in his life. And so if you are vulnerable and very real, and you put your heart on your sleeve, and again, it doesn't mean it's unprocessed. It just means that your level of vulnerability is really deep. It's very profound for a man, that cracks open a man's heart, and it gets him to be even more present.
It actually personally arouses me.
Absolutely, bro. Absolutely. And again, there's biological reasons for that. You know, like a man steps into his power when he sees that woman in his life that he cares about hurting. There are peaks in his testosterone. He sees her differently. He wants to protect. He wants to be there. That then forms a bond and a closeness. That's where the arousal can come from as well. You know, he has this idea of, oh, how can I help her? How can I, quote unquote, fix this? Even though that's maybe not what she wants, it's another conversation. But these are the things that are unconsciously or consciously going through him, which is bringing him closer. And again, sexual intimacy then can come into play as well. And so it's a really beautiful thing for a man to witness that vulnerability and just that openness and that sharing. And it helps him navigate you at a deeper level as well.
Yeah. So would you say that for a woman then, it's the process or the way that they can go about it is taking, if there's lots of deep processing that needs to be done, understanding your processing type? Is it more verbal processing where you need to discuss with some girlfriends? Is it more, you know, somatic release,
or introspective processing where you're journaling and thinking? Because that could be part of it as well for individuals, you know?
Yeah, cool. So would they discern the degree of processing that needs to take place and either choose to do that with whatever degree of sisterhood they have, or if they discern that it's not a huge amount of processing, they can do some with their partner? Or are you saying process it on your own yourself?
No, absolutely. That's a very real thing. But again, you know, go back to respecting your partner's space and boundaries and say, look, I want to do some processing with you. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Why not?
So non-leaky though. Non-leaky, no projecting.
You're aware of it. You have awareness around it. And that doesn't mean you have to be in massive control. Not at all. people should be a student or need to be a student. I don't like using the word should, but it's really important that you're a student enough to know that emotions are a very intangible, can be a very intangible thing and can be a very random thing. You go down many rabbit holes, you can start crying and that can turn into engulfing tears and screams and choking on tears and snot and shit. Like you can't control that. So as an individual holding that space, you've got to be prepared for that. If that's too much for you, then you either have to set healthy boundaries around that or develop a greater, depending on the relationship dynamic and the agreements that you have, is develop a different a capacity for that, a tolerance for that, a connection to that, and what it means, and not make it about you. I think the lesson could be many, there could be many lessons, but it's not about you, it's about them, and you don't have to take it personally. It's not a reflection on you, it's how they process. And if you really can't hold that, again, go back to setting healthy boundaries. Look, darling, I love you, but I can't hold this right now. Can you go elsewhere while I learn to do this? Or will I get some guidance and support? Or, there are many different ways, but honesty, I'm getting to the point of here, just being honest. Yes. Be honest with what you can and can't hold. And understand that this can go in any direction. And that's also a beautiful thing. Like, we polarize ourselves, Ryan, so much in our society, bro. Like, it's, I did a podcast I was in an interview with a friend of mine, dear friend of mine. He's in Colorado just before us, early on in the afternoon, my afternoon here. And we were talking about unity and we were talking about division in the world right now. And I said, bro, how can we even think about unity consciousness and not be in this segregated state and this divided state when there's so much division within ourselves? We are so averse to looking at our broken parts, quote unquote broken parts. We're so averse to looking at our wounding and our pain and our fears and the parts that are really uncomfortable. We only want to experience the good, no fear, or, good vibes only. It's like, yeah, okay, I'm a big fan of good vibes only, and don't spiritually bypass and be a fucking idiot. That's because that's what we're doing. We're being ignorant. Yeah. Idiot is just ignorance, which is the lack of awareness. I mean, it's a bit of a harsh word, and sometimes I do it to jolt people. I say it to jolt people. Totally. But we're in ignorance, and I spent so much of my life being in ignorance, spiritually bypassing, not wanting to feel my fears, not wanting to deal with my stuff that was still impacting me, but I wasn't consciously owning it or seeing it. I kept still experiencing those very painful experiences. And so we have to embrace all aspects of who we are, man. And that's just part of life.
Yeah. Well, you've obviously, based on our last chat, I know that you've gone through a process where you were at a point where you were quite disempowered in life, and you've taken so many proactive steps to gaining awareness and then taking responsibility. And I feel like empathy is important for people that are ignorant, but once you become aware, then it becomes a responsibility. And a lot of people play victim. And a quote that I really like is that you have to take responsibility for things that you weren't responsible for. That goes to your inner child wounds it wasn't your fault that your parents did anything to you that caused repercussions in the way that you show up in the world in the future. Nothing that happens to you is your fault, but it is your responsibility. Well, sometimes it's your fault, but it's your responsibility to take ownership for that. And when you get to that point, I think a great symptom of the self-worth that you've developed in yourself is that you can speak freely and express yourself and own yourself and be able to say things like fucking idiot and just know that within yourself that there's a groundedness to it.
Yeah. And I also understand that some people learn really well with negative reinforcement. Most most in positive reinforcement. I'm more of a fan of that as well. I think that's super important to have that, to be in that space where we are more grounded and connected to ourselves, and we are healthily reinforcing transformation and changes we want to make. I'm also aware that some people, men particularly athletes and people of that mindset, or people that are really outwardly successfully driven, can be really have a propensity to be negatively reinforced. And some would say, hey, if it's getting the outcome that they want and the outcome is somewhat healthy, then the reinforcement process doesn't matter too much. I don't know about that. I think it does matter. I think it's important. But yeah, I resonate with what you're saying, man. I just think we have an opportunity to go deeper.
I feel like for any of the achievers, the sports, people who are elite that want to just always drive for more, have a little bit of the masochist in them, where they do derive unhealthy pleasure from their own pain. They want to put themselves through the paces because that's what they believe that they're worth, because they were always taught to be that way from a young age, which will become more grounded and healthy as you do more inner work and have more self-worth. I've got a question around your perspective on what we're talking about with the natural predisposition for where men and women thrive in groups. That makes a lot of sense when you think about tribal dynamics, because that you spend your whole life with a group of people, and the men do activities together and the women do activities together, and then everyone does activities together. So you have that support network right there ready every day, because you're spending every day together. If in this society where things have become more and more separate, families are units that can consist of 1, 2, 3, 4 people, and become more disconnected from other people, like especially those who have been trained by society to be hyper analytical. And my girlfriend works for a medical family. There's 2 surgeons, and they've moved from another country where they don't know anyone. I can imagine that dynamic would be one that's not, they don't have the lady wouldn't have a sisterhood to go to, that man wouldn't have a brotherhood to go to be able to express himself. So if there's anyone that's listening that's resonated with the importance of developing that safe space with people of the same sex, how would you go about creating that if currently you either don't have a friends group, or you do have a friends group, but it's one that's not based in deep, safe connection? Do you have any tips around that?
Yeah, we all want safety, and we all want to be seen and understood and heard and loved and cared for, acknowledged, respected, appreciated. The guidance I'd give for that, and it's super simple, and sorry if it's really simple, is just go and get one. There's no real other way to say it. Create one. Go join a meetup group. Check out your local Facebook groups. Create your own meetup group. I had a friend that was feeling really disconnected, and I said, just go create your meetup. Go create a meetup group. Create a meetup group. You're a FIFO worker. You're a work on, work off worker. Not anymore, he isn't. And he was really missing male connection. And he has an entrepreneurial mindset. He just had to go back to the mines to get some money. He was having a family, and he's starting another business. And he didn't like it there. So he created a meetup. He's always in a meetup group with a Facebook group. Like 50-something men respond, and 20-something men came to his first meetup that he did. He made massive. And I mean, I don't want to share his story too much. It's relevant, but there's a little bit of privacy around there. But he had a big story of isolation, and there were very real reasons for that. And he was coming back from being quite isolated for a very long time from people.
Especially with FIFO, right?
Yeah. That was an added layer to it. But just because of his past and his history. And that was a big step for him, really painful big step for him, but he did it. And, that's easier said than done, because it comes with a lot of wounding, fear of abandonment, rejection, loss, old stuff that comes up when we create new friendships. How are they seeing us? How are we being perceived? Our self-worth story comes up, our capability story comes up. And so we have to do that inner work. And maybe it means working with a therapist, a coach, a counselor, a mentor prior to building the confidence, getting someone to help you gain the confidence to be in that space. And that's really useful as well.
Yeah. I loved that piece of advice from the last chat that we had, which was that if you're starting out on your journey of developing your self-worth, work with someone one-to-one who's got experience and can therefore have the duty of care to guide you in a way that's going to allow you to go to the depth of what's caused instability, insecurity, lack of self-worth as a starting point. But I also really like that point, which was a firm, direct point around taking responsibility. And I always said to my clients in my previous business, I don't say it as much because it's not needed as much with the clients I work with now, but you have to have the right balance between taking radical responsibility with no guilt. You need to be able to hold yourself to huge accountability, but not have any guilt or shame that you place on yourself based on that performance, which is such a fine line. You have to discern when you give yourself, take responsibility, but then also if you struggle to in a day, don't allow that to then drop down into massive guilt and shame. Press on, give yourself a hug, be your own best friend, be in your own corner, and then give yourself the opportunity to step up again.
Absolutely, brother. And I
That
completely
was a
resonate with
smooth little rise there.
that. Got to. I feel like standing. Got to stand.
It's like when they do the elevator thing.
Yeah. Wanted to keep the flow of it.
Beautiful. So, what are your thoughts? Because when people that are listening right now, the biggest thing that I find helpful, or that's just integral, is that ability to take responsibility for your own inner growth journey and actually making it. For me, it's my top priority. That's partly because of my values, but I have my absolute top priority is developing myself. And I know it's a never-ending journey, and I take full responsibility for it. And I'm always, if I need help, I fucking reach out and I just hire a mentor, or I do another coaching session, or I do a healing session, or I ask friends for help. And I've got so much support that I can't even fathom how I ever even got by in the world without the degree of support that I have now, because there is just so much around me. What's your perspective on that? And what's your kind of like support network look like?
When you ask my perspective, I'll let you know what my support network looks like. Absolutely, and it's quite diverse. When you ask for my perspective, what specific perspective are you asking for?
Just comments on it.
Oh, okay. More so on
just seeing if
the
you got
importance.
Any thoughts that arise.
Yeah, the importance of having a support network. Well, firstly, I think it's everything. I think we're relational beings, and I honestly don't know, Ryan. I think I expressed this to you before, bro. I don't know if I'd be here if it wasn't for various support networks. My brother, close friends, counselors, psychologists, shamans, spiritual healers, spiritual guides, energy workers. I really don't know if I'd be here without all those people. Physically, I don't think I'd physically be here. And that we can't see the forest through the trees often. And it's just so necessary to have access to people that love and care for us, and that witness us without massive bias and judgment, and that are genuinely there for us. Yes. Now, whether that's an engaged service, or whether that's a dear friend, whatever, or a support group that you go to, call it Alcoholics Anonymous as an example, whatever it is, having that support, man, for me personally, it's everything. And a lot of what my business is predicated upon, my service in the world is predicated upon. It's literally that. It's literally, how do I support? I support others, whether it's small groups, large groups, individuals, because I know how important it's been. It's been a fundamental game changer, man, at every level. You know what I mean? Think about this in this way, just at a very simplistic, rudimentary level, like at a societal level. You buy a car, unless you're a mechanic, and even then, you're not servicing the car yourself. You're taking it to someone. Someone's supporting you in you being able to drive your car. You're driving on roads. You didn't pave the roads. Someone paved them for you. Your taxes paid for it, contributed to it, etc. You're watching a TV. You're watching a movie or a documentary on a screen or a computer here. You didn't make the computer. Someone created that for you. There's a level of support in that, supporting your endeavors. You need a computer to get online. And these days, of course, build a funnel, build a website, build this, build that. Get people into your community, into your ether, make money, get that money and put it somewhere else and use it else. But people are supporting you in your endeavors. Someone created Zoom. They saw a necessity in the marketplace. Sure, it's an opportunity for economic growth, but it's also a need in the marketplace. Yes. They created this digital platform for teleconferencing, video conferencing. So we're always being supported. I think support is fucking everything. Yeah. And I think we don't lean on it enough.
Yeah. Thanks for that. The other part of what I was curious to get your perspective around is making growth a priority in your life and transcending the ignorance or victim mode. I'm curious to know like the point in which you did that, because we spoke at the end of the last podcast. You mentioned you were going through a tough time and there was a chasm that you crossed getting into personal development and making this whole thing a reality. And I know how much you've grown over the last 7, 8 years, 6 years, however long it's been. People are listening. I do this because of my love for people, my encouragement for people, because Tony Robbins helped pull me out of a situation where I didn't feel like I could transcend my environment. I felt like this is who I was and that was it. And I do this to give people encouragement and love, but I also really want to encourage people that are listening to, you've got to take responsibility for your growth and go, you have access to anything that you need for yourself, and you have to hammer that support and claim that support and demand that support and know you're worth that support. And then once you've done that as a foundation and prioritize this, then you can start growing and things become easier. But it does start with a huge element of responsibility.
Yeah, my perspective on that is that we have to have growth, aka expansion, aka love, as a top priority in our suite of values. It has to be, for me, it have to be anything. You do what you want to do, but for me personally, it has to be in my top 5, and it is. Growth is fundamental to me, because without me growing and expanding and choosing to be open to new possibilities, everything else is almost redundant.
And at the moment, your current reality is a product of that expansion past that initial journey of developing a base level of self-worth. And I would say most people's, if you just ask someone, like, what's the gap for you living the life you want to live? They'll come up with a symptom. It's, I want to have my business working. I need that dream relationship. I want to be in that dream job, or my body. It's my body. But ultimately, once you transcend that foundation of self-worth, which requires growth being a top priority, then you can get to a point where you have enough influence of yourself that you can choose how you navigate life. And then everything on top of that's just like fun, extra, not just fun, but extra expansion. Then you're tackling that 20% for a long time, that the never ending 20%, but that 80%, without it, life is a lot more suffering.
Yeah, I hear that, man.
Yeah. Beautiful, man. Well, I've absolutely loved this chat today. Thank you so much for jumping on. There's a couple of things that I'd love to do, some potent things to wrap up. Yeah. One of which, before I hit you with one last question, is where can people find you? Where would you like them to hit you, where you are mainly producing, posting content, etc.?
Yeah, of course, man. So at Stefanos, Sifandos are any of my social handles. Instagram, largely on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn. Really getting into TikTok lately, actually. Yeah. It's an interesting platform, very interesting. Learning something new, Yeah. Super interesting platform. And so any of there. But if you want to find me and get to know a little bit more about what I'm doing, very simply, you can go to one of my web pages, which is groowithstef.com. groowithstef.com. Super simple. And there's a lot of information there. A lot of free stuff as well.
Amazing. I know, and you guys, if you're listening to other episodes, know that I always highly encourage people reaching out and just mentioning how the interview impacted you, or if you have a follow-up question or something like that. So if you go to the show notes, choose your preferred platform and just send Steph a message. It means the absolute world to me when people do it, and I know it'll mean the absolute world to him. And it's crazy because, you've got so much wisdom and knowledge, and you kind of are on a pedestal in a certain way in some people's minds, but people can literally just actually access you. You're not necessarily going to be given all this free coaching, but people can send you a message and connect with you, and that can really happen. So go and
100%.
Add Steph, send him a message, tell him what you got from the interview.
Bro, I legitimately do my best to get back to every message that I can. Legitimately. Yeah. It's not the easiest thing to do, and I can't get back to everyone, but I have a genuine intention to do that. And if I can't get back to personally, I'll literally say, can't get to you right now, but I'll answer this in the video because it's such a great question. I think it will benefit so many.
Amazing. So definitely do that. My last question to you is, if you could give the version of you before you stepped into personal development and developing your groundedness and how you show up in a relationship, if you could give that version of you any advice for the future and how to navigate the future in a more loving, connected, grounded, powerful way, what would that one piece of advice be?
It would be to cease the deep, horrendous judgment upon self, which transcends onto others. It's that real, self-loathing, self-hate, dislike for self, judgmental upon self aspect of me that I created during my formative years, that really carried on during my teenage years and my adult life. And that self-judgment so harsh on myself when I quote unquote failed or didn't do well, or made mistakes, and just to be kinder to myself, to meet myself with a deeper level of compassion, so I could feel that and experience that for me, but also be able to give that to others as well.
That's really beautiful, man. And as we wrap up, I want to honor you, Steph, for being such a leader and a role model. That you've got such a beautiful balance of bringing so much love forward. It's hanging off the edge of your sleeve, and you also bring so much power and groundedness. And I mentioned to you earlier before we started the interview that you've got a lot of women that follow. You've also got a lot of men, but men are starting to become more open to letting their vulnerability out, letting the fullness of what it means to be a man out. And I honestly believe that you are carrying that torch like an absolute legend. And I appreciate that because it's inspiring for me. And I know so many other men you're going to absolutely, and you already have changed your life. So thank you for being you, man.
Thank you, brother.